Welcome to a dazzling new episode of Mistweeted on the McFuture podcast. I'm Steve Faktor. Let's jump right in. Let's talk philosophy. Just because you're alive doesn't mean you're alive. Like I died sometime around my 40th PowerPoint presentation. There are a lot of people living unlived lives. Let's take the pandemic, for example, and the lockdown. Everyone is rightfully concerned about their health or their parents or other people might be sick. But I think just as much care has to be put in to actual living. There is nothing worse than lost time. It's the one commodity we can't make more of. That is the only real scarce resource for us. And we are wasting the lives of children, for example. They're losing their childhoods by being shackled in front of Zooms. Adults are being shackled in front of Zooms. We are not living. And living is a risk. When you go out and drive your car and you go 50, 60, 70, 80 miles an hour, there is some percentage chance you might die or injure yourself seriously or injure others and ruin your life or whatever it is, or ruin your car and create a great expense for yourself. And yet we do it. People run down ski slopes. People jump bungee cords. They jump out of airplanes. Those are all calculated risks. We go on roller coasters. Life is full of these risks. And there are a lot of people with unlived lives. And part of it is people who never take a risk. You know, whenever I start recording, I get this crazy sense of dread. Like, is this the one that's going to cancel me? Is this the one that's going to keep me from getting hired by company X or Y? At some point, I let it go because I just made a decision. This is what I want to do. And if I'm going to put it out there, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to do it all out. There's no all out anymore. Because if you're huddling in fear in your apartment and you're not socializing, you're not partaking in all the things that make life beautiful, all the entertainment, all the comedy, all the music or musicals or plays or concerts or whatever it is that you're into, we're not living. And I don't know that the risk of COVID is worth giving up our lives. And that's what we've done. And there are others who have other unlived lives, whether it's someone who's never moved out of their neighborhood, never taken a risk, had a dream and let it die, a mailman on the same route for their whole life. And that's not to say they can't be fulfilled. I guess it depends on where you set your goals. But as I drive around the suburbs and I see the lack of interest, the lack of passion, the lack of life in people, it bothers me. And I'd never lived in this environment before. I've always lived in New York City, especially as an adult. And it's kind of crazy to me that so much life is unlived. And, you know, there are people who look at people living in New York and go, you're going to live in that little box and pay $4,000 a month? You're out of your mind too. Yes, maybe. But I think if there's an ambition you have to pursue it. You have to. And sometimes you have to set the bar high enough where there's a chance of failure, even if that failure includes your health, because you want it badly enough. Ignore what people say, observe what they do. I could not care less about my friends' political beliefs. I have friends all over the spectrum, like crazy far left, crazy far right. I don't know, maybe not that crazy far right, but right-ish. To me, it doesn't matter. Are they good people? Will they help you out in a bind? Will they forward your resume when you need a job? Will they put in a good word for you? Will they respond to an urgent text? Will they drive you to the hospital? Will they ask how you are? Those are the things that matter. So if you're unfriending people because of their political views, that makes you a moron. Even words don't matter because often words are disingenuous. If people don't have the intent to follow through or don't have the right values, who cares what the words are that they say? Who cares if they seem like they're saying nice things or they're trying to stick up for people? If they're not actually going to put out effort, who cares? Look at their actions, whether it's in your personal life, in your business life. Look at what people do. Do they follow through? And those are the people that matter. Nothing about their politics, nothing about stupid thoughts, stupid jokes, even if they say something offensive, how they are with people. That tells you everything. And this is something Glenn Greenwald, founder of The Intercept, wrote. He's the guy who wrote up all of Snowden's work. He said, also notice how often people now speak not in the rational language of persuasion or argument, but in the imperious language of decree, like they're kings. It's like, I decree that you shall not say this word anymore. It is obnoxious. There are so many people who have not done anything in their lives, or they're young and stupid and have so much baking yet to do in the oven. They are unbaked bread. The nerve to lecture people and to decree things. We shouldn't do this anymore. We shouldn't say this anymore. Listen, we are all empowered people. We don't have to turn to special slogans for our empowerment. We are empowered. So if you're in a situation where you can speak up for somebody when they're being wronged, you do that. You should have some sort of moral compass, but your moral compass should guide you towards convincing people to change and making them see the light. If your ideas are truly righteous, truly virtuous, truly worthwhile values, then they will eventually see the light. But if you try to stop them, or try to use force, or try to use government, or try to use decree, you're only going to create enemies. You're going to create resentment. People are going to hate you. And that's why there's so much hate right now in our society, because so many people are ruling by decree. No one wants to be ruled by decree, and certainly not in this country. This guy, Dan Go, he wrote, the easiest way to create stress and anxiety is to worry incessantly on unimportant things. And I wrote, unfortunately, many can't discern what's important from what isn't. We are getting caught up in so much minutia. And I'll use this presidential election and even national politics as a perfect example. Yeah, those things are important, but most people, I would say, aside from the pandemic or up until the pandemic, didn't really notice a huge difference in their lives from the Obama to the Trump administration, even from the Bush administration through Trump. And the reason for that is our government, especially at the federal level, is designed to work slow. There's so many checks and balances. There's so many bumps in the road that the founding fathers purposely put in so things couldn't move that quickly. So it's okay to take your eye off that ball, because that ball is moving so slowly that you can focus on what really matters. So if you still want to stay in this political realm, local politics has way more impact on your life than anything that happens at the national level. Sure, if there's a nuclear war, that'll be a problem. but short of that, your transportation, safety, schools, clean streets, snow cleanup, clean air, clean ponds and rivers, all of these things are falling by the wayside, because I bet you can't even name your local representatives. 99% of you can't. I can't. We've taken our eye off the ball. Also, they have no oversight right now. Newspapers have gone out of business. Even the ones that are still in business, they can't afford to have reporters investigating a story for 2, 3, 4 months, because that story is just going to fly by as someone's scrolling through their feed, and it's going to get no attention at all. And so corruption is running wild at the local and state levels, and no one is paying attention because there's no countervailing force. So my suggestion is turn your eye towards that if you want to stay in the political realm. But if you look outside the political realm, just look at life. What matters? Your family matters. Your community matters. Not much beyond that. Your friends, of course, I'll throw that into the community, but your friends could be anywhere. Everything else isn't that important. Once you've lived a life, once you've achieved the things that you've wanted to achieve, then you can start focusing on some of these more esoteric things. But I know people at rallies who don't have their shit together at all. They should be rallying in their living rooms, putting resumes together, or learning a skill on Udemy, not sending up placards. That's not productive. That's not activism. That's deflection. That's procrastination. If we are in a simulation, we're all gamers. This is the game to win. You have to define what winning means to you. You can sit and play video games, and it's very clear, right? You get to the next level, you defeat the bigger monster, you get more weapons. The levels are clearly defined for you. Life is not that way. Some people, it's very clear, they want money. Other people want power. Other people want fame. There are other people who want to grow daisies in their backyard. There are people who want to paint. I don't think we have been trained or spend enough time thinking about what winning this game means for us. And what's it going to take to do that? Because sometimes you have to do the ugly, dirty business of doing work for other people in order to be able to afford to have wins in the things you really have a passion for. And so I encourage people to really think about, what does not only winning mean, but what are those levels? Think of yourself as a game designer. What does it mean to get more weapons? More weapons could be more education, learning a new skill. I recently learned how to edit in Adobe Premiere. That took me a couple of weeks, but it's great. I'm able to do it and I'm getting more advanced. So what are the things that help you power up? What do the levels look like? What are the monsters going to be at each of those levels? And then how do you defeat them to get to your ultimate goal, whatever that may be? So turn yourself into a game designer and see if you can design the game you need. And the reason you need to break it into levels is because you're not ready to jump to defeat the giant beast right away. You have to do it step by step. Each of those steps makes you stronger and gives you better weapons to deal with that ultimate beast. Ooh, Ultimate Beast. That'll be the name of my next video game. Nobody steal that. Profit seekers cannot be reliable truth tellers. And I say this as a capitalist. So if you look at the NBA and Nike and China, you look at TV news and the way they manipulate people, you look at influencers who are basically faking going to rallies. Like you see them going to protests, taking a few pictures in their, in their little cosplay outfits and then getting back into their fancy SUV, or all these BS corporate campaigns. Truth always loses to profit. Always. Sellers are compromised because they're appeasers. They're in the business of pleasing as many people as possible. And you know what happens when you try to please people? You don't tell them the truth because the truth hurts. If you're a capitalist or a profit seeker, you don't want to hurt the people who enrich you, who pay your bills, who pay your employees. You're already compromised. Now, what makes truth possible? One thing is desperation, right? You know people who are cornered, who have nothing to lose, who will say whatever they want to do. It's like that homeless guy that I've seen in Manhattan while I was eating pizza outside at this nice pizzeria. I looked over and he was peeing between cars. That guy does not care. That guy, he is peeing his truth, not thinking, what are these other people going to think of me? Startups are a good example of this, where, look, if you have 0% market share, you try crazy things. You do aggressive things. You break things. Sometimes you take gambles, maybe even with security or other things that take longer to do right, because you're trying to defeat this big company. So your truth is basically daring, right? Daring to take risks. And the biggest risk takers are ones that are desperate, that are hungry. On the complete opposite side of the equation, people who have FU money. FU money buys you a lot of freedom. You can say a lot of no's. There could be a person who can make you millions of dollars, but if you have tens of millions or hundreds of millions and you don't like that person, they don't make you happy working with them, you could turn them away. You can afford to do that. And you can afford to tell them what you think of them. The next thing is for people who are, let's say, creatives. There's a lot of people who are writing newsletters on Substack, which they pay like $5 a month. And if they make enough money on there or on Patreon, go to my Patreon, patreon.com/McFuture. So once they make enough money, they can really tell the truth. Once my Patreon gets to like $100,000 a month, you're going to have to sit there holding a stress ball and a security blanket and your spouse and some sort of comfort pony or whatever animal that you're using. And when people have that security and they're being funded by the people who will speak the truth to them, they will speak it. That is the best relationship. That's not to say we're going to get to an overall truth, but we're certainly going to get to that person's truth. And the more they're liberated to do it, the better. And a guy wrote back when I posted that, he said, "This makes me think of the old anarchist observation that honest communication is only possible between equals. As soon as a power differential is introduced, both sides are motivated to dishonesties. The greater the differential, the greater the lying and hiding." Now, there is some truth to that. If you're in a situation where you're like a young upstart and you're working for a corporation and the boss invites you to a party at his house or her house, whatever, and you're among all of these senior people, you're on your best behavior. You are watching every word carefully. You're going to make sure that that drink's not spilled. You can go, oh, I better have the white wine in case I spill the red one. So you're overthinking everything and you are far from yourself. You are definitely not a truth teller. So in that power differential, even if that person, your boss, calls you into their office, you're not going to have a perfectly honest conversation. It's very rare. Like you might get to a point where you're more honest if they create a safe environment, but very rarely do people with large egos create that kind of environment. So you end up reinforcing what they want to hear and you're never truthful. So there is truth to that power differential thing, but power is only one of many determinants of honest communication. And also power is subjective when there's no direct relationship between parties. Yeah, one might be more senior, one might have make more money, but it's not always clear what the power differential is. So I don't think power is the right or only lens you should use to evaluate whether two people can be honest with each other. And equality only exists in how the law should treat you. It can't exist in outcomes. There's really no such thing as equality. And I know we talk a lot about it. There's no such thing. No one is equal. Someone's always going to outwork you. Someone's always going to slack off. Someone's always going to take the check that they get from the government and buy weed or gamble it or do whatever. There's just going to be that differential. People are different. So there is no such thing as equality. But under the law, we should be treated fairly. But in communication, it's too multifaceted. And people are just too complex for this power dynamic lens because I've been in rooms where you have these powerful, rich, elite people with high positions, like famous people you would recognize. And guess what? A 24-year-old hot chick walks into the room and she stops conversation. She walks over to that group and everyone, boom, starts paying attention to her. Even the women, because there is a power in youth and beauty, whether we like to admit it or not. And I have seen power drain from these people and to be handed to this girl who just graduated college, maybe. A lot of it is just situational. And in that situation, no one has more power than that girl at 24 speaking to men twice her age, and in some cases women. To zoom out a little bit, I'm not even sure total honesty can ever exist, even without power differentials. When people are done taking into account other people's sensitivities, feelings, social norms, and all these other boundaries that we have in society, what you can and can't say, a big percentage of truth goes uncommunicated. We don't say a lot of things that should maybe sometimes be spoken or would be valuable to the other person, but they can't, because situationally we may not be the right messenger for that message, even though that person, like me, needs to hear that, hey, Steve, you could lose a few pounds. I probably need to hear that message. And there are people in my life who tell that to me, probably more often than I like. But the reality is that if it's someone else, someone you just met, and says, hey, Steve, time to drop a few, depending on who that person is, I might take offense. I mean, I'm probably not the kind of person who would if it's done with humor, but if you do it the wrong way, then people take offense. So again, situational. And we need to keep in mind that honesty is not always possible. There was a study about young people's knowledge of the Holocaust. 23% said it's either a myth or exaggerated. 10% don't think it happened at all. 12% never heard of it. 11% think Jews were responsible. And 63% were completely unaware that 6 million Jews died. This is why we must always listen to children. When a righteous youngster starts lecturing you about values and how the world should work, pull up a chair. I'd pay $6 million for that kind of knowledge and wisdom. It's fine to hear what kids have to say, but not this much. We've overdone it. We've gone insane in worshiping kids. We are not doing our job. We are raising yet another generation of imbeciles. And then when they get older and you start to think they're smart because they went to college, then there's this next story. This is a group of Gen Zers, which is people who were born 2000 and later, and they formed their own kind of ecosystem. They're developers, and they want to develop an alternative to Silicon Valley. So they decry Silicon Valley's racism and sexism, and then they create a sexist reward system, their own programmers, called Wives. So they would give out wives. I'd imagine there's a similar one somewhere in the Middle East. They dislike tech titans, but seek their approval and their money. And they want to build solutions, but they're consumed with intersectional traits, like all the victim hierarchies and which group you belong to and who's been more oppressed, who's been less oppressed. There are smart kids out there, and these are supposedly some of our smartest. They're out there coding and building stuff, whatever that stuff is, but their minds are not developed yet. They're not really critical thinkers. They want to do their best. They want to do the right thing, and I think their intentions are good, but intentions mean nothing if the end result is meaningless or stupid, and that's okay. They can learn. But we have to make them learn. But maybe we're not smart enough to teach our kids. I'm coming to that conclusion that the teachers we're putting into the schools, the parents, we got to put a test in there or something. Right before the semen hits the egg, we got to put like a little stopper in there and go, okay, we got a few questions for you. Because, it's a short SAT-like quiz. We should encourage, but not exalt children. They're going through the motions. They're being caught up in a lot of these sort of politics of the moment. And it's okay to let them do it, but adults have got to wake up. They have to take an interest, and they can't just encourage nonsense. And they have to turn on whatever systems are supposed to evaluate what is and is not nonsense. And those systems have turned off. And another guy was suspended. He's a Chinese instructor, and there's a word that sounds like a racial slur in Chinese, but it's a very common word. I'll try to find the clip.
If you have a lot of or, and this is culturally specific, so based on your native language, like in China, the common word is that. So in China, it might be nega. So there's different words that you'll hear in different countries.
He said it in teaching the class, but the students got outraged because he kept saying a word in Chinese that happens to make them think of a racial slur. They're the racists. That's the irony of this whole thing. But he gets suspended. And now there was a story that came out that says all these teachers are scared to death to teach because now their jobs are hanging by a thread because of these hypersensitive students. And a lot of people thought, oh, we're living in this dystopian Orwellian state like 1984 where the government surveils you, or Animal Farm with this oppressive communist-like regime. But the reality is, we're living in Lord of the Flies, where the children are in charge. We have rooms of executives sitting around pathetically going, oh man, I wonder what millennials and zennials and zulials and boolials, whatever made up words that they have, what are they going to buy? What are they going to think of this campaign? 45-year-old dudes looking at TikTok videos. Oh my God, I wonder what these kids will like. Hey, let's sign this one up as an influencer. He's 12. He's 12. We're exalting children. It is so sad that we've created this society where instead of teaching kids, we're putting them up on a pedestal. Greta Thunberg said, who cares what Greta Thunberg says? Listen, I believe in climate science, but if you're going to hide behind a child who's not a scientist, I will be laughing at you. Because one, it's a child. Two, they're not a scientist. And three, what kind of person is afraid to make a valid argument? If you are truly on the right side of things, figure out a way to bring people to your side, to convince them, to make them understand what's in it for them, to do the right thing, to be pro climate and green solutions and all that. But hiding behind a child is pathetic. You're pathetic. And to exalt them as symbols of purity that we must honor, and God forbid anyone says anything bad. Yeah, because of course they're going to say you're using them as human shields. Of course they're going to say something bad because you're hiding instead of standing up for what you believe, what scientists believe. We're the scientists who are supposed to be making these cases, not the children. We have crafted an insane society. And just in general, we've created so many ways for people to feel special without actually being special. Slacktivism. Hey, let me just click this box. I fell into this. I clicked the box at some point. I'm like, whew, man, all this activism is really wearing me out. I'm breaking a sweat here. And weird spellings of names. Now, I don't blame the kids for this, but I blame the parents because they know that if they spell Karen with a Q, and these days you should spell it with a Q because apparently it's a slur of some kind. But when you do that, you are always drawing attention to your child. And yes, I understand everyone wants to be special. Everyone wants to project how special they are through their kids. But it's about you. That's you trying to do something. You put enough Q's in a kid's name. And who is that about? Is that about the kid or is that about you? Why don't you make sure the kid is special on their own based on their accomplishments and not on their weird spelled name? Or whether you join a group or mob. Look, yeah, we're individuals. We're kind of powerless. And in the grand scheme of the universe, we're not even a wart on the universe's ass. However, when you join a group or a movement or a mob, all of a sudden, hey, I'm important. I'm part of a cause. Whether that cause makes sense doesn't matter. You even stop questioning it because that sense of purpose and that sense of belonging become way more important than the actual validity or effectiveness of the cause. Tattoos. Yes, if you defeated your arch enemy in a gladiatorial arena, and if you slayed a dragon, you deserve your tattoo. If you slayed Bin Laden and you have your SEAL Team 6 guys and you get a tattoo, yes, that's great. That's a well-earned tattoo. But if you go into a mall and go, yeah, how about a cobra that starts around here? Not as impressive. That's just trying to make yourself outwardly special without being inwardly special. It is a retail purchase. And same thing with bumper stickers, which are basically tattoos for your car. And fashion is another thing. I was sitting at dinner the other day and someone looked at me and was like, why are you wearing such boring clothes? Because I think I was wearing like a black pullover sweater and jeans. And I'm like, listen, I bring the excitement. I bring the noise. I don't need my clothing to out-scream me, because chances are I'll be doing the screaming and I'll be doing the talking that will draw all the attention I need. I don't need my clothes to be dancing on top of that. So that's not the important part. So I think it's important for us to understand what we're bringing to the table, and clothing has a tendency to obscure it because it's purely external. And physical and sexual traits as identity. Listen, I'm for anyone being whoever they want to be. But when you make it the centerpiece of your life and your identity, and that becomes all you talk about, that is the least interesting thing I can imagine. Who you have sex with, none of my business. How you identify yourself, probably also none of my business unless you want me to address you a certain way. But beyond that, if you keep building on this externality, that doesn't make you interesting. What you do, what you achieve, those things are interesting. I love comedy. There's so many great comedians. There's a dwarf comedian. He is brilliant. He's hysterical. Look, he acknowledges the obvious because he wants to release the discomfort so people feel comfortable laughing at his jokes. But ultimately, his jokes are about the human condition, about his observations, about his intelligence, about how he sees the world. It's not about, his height and harping on that. Those are the least interesting comics. They're the ones who end up being least successful in the business. And same thing with guys like Tim Dillon. Tim Dillon's gay, but you'd never know it because he talks about all kinds of issues in politics. He's well-read. He's a smart guy. He's just a hysterical person. He doesn't make his identity the centerpiece. And that's not to say it shouldn't be important to you, but to you, not to the world. And there are ways to be special. You can help others. You can donate your time or your money. You can raise good kids. There's probably nothing more important than that. Create something useful or joyful for others, whether it's a product or a service or a piece of art, anything. Create jobs. If you build a company that employs people, then those people can do for their community and for their family what they need and what they wish to improve the world. Those are real, tangible things. And those are just examples. There's other things you can do. When I was a kid, my parents practiced something way more powerful than slacktivism. They practiced something called smacktivism. Whenever I did something stupid, now that technique did not age very well, but it kind of worked. I think I turned out okay. I do shake the cashiers at Target really hard to get my change, but other than that, there's really nothing wrong at all. Not that I could detect. There's something to be said for not physical abuse, but there's something to be said for waking people up and for making them realize that they are able to do great things, but not superficial things. And this is where critical thinking, I keep coming back to that. You have to go back and think, is this really helping? Am I really helping? Am I focusing on the right things? And a lot of us are not. And ultimately, I blame 2020 on bad dads. Maybe some people have a problem with this, but I don't care. Obviously, things change. Men and women don't have strict roles that they have to follow. But historically and typically, you'll have the nurturing mother type and you'll have the disciplinarian father. So you need both, right? You need comfort in times of need, and you need to be maybe spoiled a little bit, to get the M&Ms or get to stay up late to watch a TV show or whatever it is you want to do. But there are other times that you need delayed gratification and discipline, throwing you into the pool to teach you how to swim, all of those things. And we need both. We need the nurturing. And, our political parties have sort of divided into those things. The Democrats are the mom party, where they want to give you welfare, they want to give you universal basic income, they want to give you health care, they want to give you housing, they want to pay off your education. So that's sort of the maternal wing of America. And then you have the paternal wing, which is we're going to give you jobs, you're going to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Those are the Republicans. We need both. Somehow we think that in this battle, one is going to win and the other one's going to lose. No, we all lose if one of them loses, whichever one. We need both. The bottom line is it's very hard to be a good father or paternal figure. And there are just as many rich absentee or loser dads who are busy working, they're ignoring their kids, or they're divorced and they're absentees or whatever. And there's some people who are unfortunate and don't have a father in their lives. But it's super important to have that quality in a child's life. And if we live in denial of that, we will continue to see a deterioration in society. And that's why we need to encourage fathers to do their job and raise their kids and enforce those rules and enforce that discipline. Because without that discipline, people are lost. And that's why people like Jordan Peterson are suddenly becoming popular. He's offering young men something they didn't get. They're craving discipline, but they're not getting it from this world. So if there's any message that I'd like to leave out there is be a good dad. And if you're not able to have a dad in your life, then work on strengthening your resolve. Because when people have this dissatisfaction and when they have this emptiness that can never be filled, it's very easy to manipulate for others, to tap into that anger and to weaponize it and turn it towards other issues and other people. And that rage can't be stopped because now it's not about that issue, but it's about latching that issue to that person's internal unrest. And that is a very difficult thing to defeat. And it needs to be defeated, hopefully by the individual and not in some macro way that leads to violence. I feel like everyone out there needs a hug, but they also need to be checked for weapons. Part of the problem is with wokeness, which I characterize as externalized and weaponized self-resentment. So these are sad, broken people projecting their hurt onto others. And that's why they're so easy to radicalize and use as pawns by leftist movements. It's not just leftism that can radicalize people. Broken people can be indoctrinated by right-wing movements too, but those tend to be overtly aggressive and hateful and violent. So they tend to skew young and male. But leftist movements are a little bit different. They're kind of passive-aggressive. They cloak their brutality with egalitarianism. Hey, everyone's equal and we'll kill you if they're not. Or we'll cancel you and you'll lose your job. You won't be beheaded like you would in a right-wing regime, but you won't be able to earn a living. So it's kind of like, hey, my hands are clean, there's no blood on them, but you're not working and you're destitute and your family is starving. Because your hands are clean appeals to a wider share of hurt people. Those who can't stand the violence, but are really inflicting passive-aggressive violence onto others. Equality does not mean protection from satire or scrutiny, but equal doses of it. Otherwise, think about what the people who've anointed themselves your protectors must think of you. I remember, and I think I might have mentioned it in some other episode, there was a comedian in Canada which has no free speech. He was doing stand-up and he made fun of this crippled kid in the audience. And this kid wanted to be made fun of because that's what comedians do. They pick on people in the audience and they make fun of them. So the comedian was doing his job. He was treating this kid exactly as he would treat everyone else. And the minute you stop, the minute you treat people differently, you think of them as less. You think of them as weak. You think of them as unable to take care of themselves. And I refuse to do that. I am going to hold up, assuming you're able. Look, there are people who have mental incapacities and you can't set the bar the same place for them as you do for others. But anything that's within your capacity to do, I'm going to expect it of you, whether you're poor, whether you're handicapped, whether you're part of some other group that has historically been discriminated against. I have the same expectations of you at work, in life, in terms of success, in terms of passion, in terms of grit, in terms of doing the right thing. I expect the same. And that includes satire. That includes scrutiny. If you screw up, I'm not going to take it easy on you because you're in some bubble that some protector put you in, because that's not really your protector. That's your enabler. We need to start thinking about people as true equals. And equality means treating people the same, not putting them in a special box or elevating them like, oh, you can't hurt this one because I am here to protect them. No, you're not helping. Stupid. There are only two reasons to drink. One is to forget. Two is to avoid a lifetime of resenting the alcoholics that you have to subsidize when they split the check. So listen, I've been through this. I'm not much of a drinker. I'll drink a little bit social. I'll have maybe one or two when people are out drinking. But I don't even want that. Honestly, I just want water. I just want to wash down the food. I'm not that interested in flavored drinks. Once in a while, I like a Diet Snapple. But this has been very frustrating to me because there are people who will knowingly order all kinds of drinks and they know they're alcoholics, and then they kind of have an excuse by the end of the night because they've racked up realistically, $80 of the tab while you had maybe $20 because you just had the plate of food, and then you're dividing it by two and you're like, well, I guess everyone throws in 50. So listen, people have to be more conscious of that. And I'm not saying we should all split hairs to do it, but if you know that you're the heavy drinker, own up to it. You can't hide. In fact, you're not hiding. You're fostering resentment. That other person is pissed at you. And even if you're pissed, and I'm using the British pissed right now, which means drunk, even if you're the pissed one, you have no right to. When you sober up, you're like, hey, I'm going to Venmo you that $30 and do that. Speaking of alcohol, vodka is the purest form of drinking, and no one pretends it's for the taste like they do with wine. You just get fucked up fast. It can be made from potatoes or car parts, and then you die with dignity at 50. I think that's almost word for word what's written on Lenin's tomb in Moscow. My people, that's what they do. Dead at 50, but you love the whole thing. Or you didn't love it. You didn't feel any of it because it's cold and you're drunk. Are Brits still allowed to play Americans on film? Wait, let me check my intersectional charts. Oh, death penalty. I think it's time to kill every Brit who plays an American. It's just fair. It's just fair. I looked at the chart. It's what it says. Sorry, people. If you're not the exact person being portrayed on film, it's pretty much over for you. Acting is over. And this brings me to the meta theory. A well-intentioned idiot can do more harm than an evil mastermind. We have so many people, so many with good intentions. They're thinking they're doing the right thing, but they are harming society and they're hurting the people they say they're helping. And ultimately, you might find they do more damage than the people who don't care or don't even bother pretending to care. So let's be careful with do-gooders. Just because your intentions are good, I don't stop judging there. For a long time, I thought I was an atheist, but I was never really a motivated atheist. To me, it was just a good way to sleep in on the weekends. But disbelief kind of became a chore. You almost felt like you had to refute things. And I'm not in the business of refuting things. So what I settled into is this sort of comfy agnosticism. But I also now have a very healthy respect for religion, especially as a vessel for values. Otherwise, that vessel never sets sail. There is nothing right now that is a conduit for values in our society. And until further notice, religion's the best we've got. And honestly, I don't expect the people who are not religious, and increasingly young people are not religious. So I don't expect religion to suddenly pick up and everyone finds God. But I think we have a very serious ethics vacuum, and no one has come up with a very good way to explain and convey what is right and what is wrong beyond the golden rule. It's like treat others as you'd have them do unto you, which is a great starting point, but there has to be more. And I think it has to be modernized for today's age. And right now, I don't see anyone or anything doing that. To some extent, people like Jordan Peterson might be doing it. There might be some others who are scratching at the surface of it, but a lot more needs to be done. I can't speak for women, but a lot of men I see, especially young men, are a little bit lost and a little bit directionless, and often erectionless because no one's having sex because they're beating off to so much porn online. There's a lot of problems in our society that need to be addressed, and values and ethics are the way to do it. In fact, I would argue that Proud Boys and even Antifa, to some extent, are manifestations of that, because people not only need that sense of belonging, they need those rules. Proud Boys have a bunch of rules. You can't masturbate, you can't do, I don't know, there's a bunch of stuff you can't do. What you can do is show up to rallies and beat the crap out of people. That apparently is okay. Anyway, we need a better vessel, and we don't have it. Oh, a word I invented, Phallusy, Phallusy. And the definition is when all of your pre-hookup expectations turn out to be wildly naive and misguided after the fact. I think we've all had many fallacies throughout our lives. I love this quote. I don't know that I have a lot to add to it. Never trust a survivor until you know how they survived. Kurt Vonnegut said that. Let me apply it for a second in a corporate setting. I wrote the 9 corporate personality types, which you should look up. It's a great piece, if I do have to say so myself. In it, one of the types is the survivor. That's a person who found a way to embed themselves in the organization. They know where all the bodies are buried. They found a little nook and corner, and they manage this one group, and they're probably going to manage it till they retire. Be very careful taking their advice, because how they survived is not necessarily how you're going to thrive. There's a difference between thriving and surviving. Learn to know the individual before you classify them as anything, before you prejudge them, or before you give them some sort of qualities that they don't deserve, good or bad. So my definition of a normal person, which is really hard to define these days, it's a person whose fake online persona most closely matches how they are in real life. I posted something on Instagram, which I'm almost never on, and I realized why I'm not on there, because a couple of posts came up from people I know, and I know their lives are not going that great, but you would never know it from the photos. These were glamorous. They were amazing. The happiest people on earth. There is such a fraudulence to that network, especially in aggregate, right? Because you're seeing everyone's greatest hit, right? So you just scroll through it, and it's all the best moments that everyone experienced, and you start to feel like such a loser. And on top of that, if you actually know these people, you're like, this is not the life they lead. This is, they managed to stop fighting and choking each other long enough to take this one photo. Aren't they romantic? Anyway, there's a fraudulence to it, and if you can do it, get off of it. It's not good for you. Speaking of beautiful people, I don't know if you could see this. I'm going to try to put up this photo. There's a guy who tattooed his entire face, dyed his eyeballs black, like with ink. This guy basically disfigured himself, and he's like, don't judge me by my disfigurements. And I got to say, that takes balls. Once you start tattooing your face, for example, you're basically telling Goldman Sachs, I'm out of your recruiting pool, right? I'm not going to be working here, right? Like there's no 3-piece suit. There's no hoodie suit combo that's going to cover up that look. There's no like, hey, have a heart-to-heart conversation with your client when your eyeballs are dyed black. You're basically tapping out. And that's okay. That's a very brave move on your part. You're saying, hey, I'm going to live this alternative life. But you can't also say, hey, don't treat me like a freak. You shouldn't be disrespectful to people like that. But I think this guy I think he was a school teacher. So listen, it's going to be a rough go of it. You don't have carte blanche to do anything and then expect an equal level of reverence and respect. You just can't. It's one thing if he was born this way. He wasn't born this way. He did this to himself. Just a quick writing tip. Unless you're essential to the story, don't write yourself into it. I read the saddest, most pathetic post on regulating technology. It should have been the most boring post, but this author made it all about himself. He was like quoting his old articles that no one cares about. And he included a selfie with this other business influencer guy. And it's like him how low is your self-esteem? People will be much more impressed if you're succinct and you get to the point. There is one exception. If you're funny. If it's needed for a joke, do it. Be a little verbose. It's okay. You can throw a little artistry into things. But other than that, it's just sad. Do the minimum necessary to get the point across unless it's going to be super entertaining. And in those cases, a little self-deprecation goes a long way. Make fun of yourself. And listen, if you're super douchey, I recommend self-defecation because nothing is more humbling than running to the theater bathroom and trying to make the best of whatever's in there. So listen, if you find yourself quoting yourself and not making a joke immediately after, get a proofreader. And by the way, this entire podcast is me quoting my own tweets. So coming from a guy who knows, this is why jokes are sprinkled in throughout this thing. Speaking of writing, if you're writing phrases like, in today's rapidly evolving world or rapidly changing economy or uncertain times, you're a hack. Stop wondering why you're not getting that promotion because that is the hackiest phrase. Just drop it. All times are unpredictable. All times are unstable. The world is always evolving. You never have to say that. It's a worthless phrase. It's garbage. It's garbage writing and you're a garbage writer. So stop writing. In fact, only sing. Okay. If you found a way to sing this like in death metal format or hip hop and you could make it entertaining, fine. Otherwise, you're horrible. And ultimately, those who can't laugh at absurdity become the absurd. Look, we're living in very absurd times, more absurd than ever. If you're busy unfriending people because they're politics or you're doing some other crazy stuff, you better stop. You better take control of your life. If you're getting angry at your family over their politics instead of just changing the subjects or talking about how great the pie is or whatever else you're eating at Thanksgiving, if you can't handle that, there's something wrong with you. You are the problem. You have to see the absurdity. And you, on some level, you have to accept it. You can't fight all of it. You just can't. It's too much. Speaking of absurdity, The Telegraph wrote, this is the headline, "Why Rebel Wilson's weight loss is sad for so many women like me." Okay, this is the biggest loser thing I've ever seen. I can't believe we're acknowledging or rewarding this. It's like the victimhood has gentrified. There is no planet on which Adele's or Rebel Wilson's weight has any bearing on your life. None. Zero. And if you find that it somehow does, you better run, not walk to therapy because there's something seriously wrong. And really that's what happened. We've created a society where we have to contend with everyone's externalized self-resentment. They're mad at themselves or something that went wrong in their lives. And now we have to pay because they're externalizing it. Listen, Rebel Wilson can be as underweight, overweight, right weight, sexy, not sexy, whatever, doesn't matter. Whatever she does has no bearing on your life. You just tune it out and move on. And if you can't and you have to write a whole article about it, we've got problems. We've got serious problems. Your feeling of empowerment is very important to those with actual power. There's a lot of talk about empowerment. Oh, we're empowering people to do this, or we're looking to empower this group or that group. Very interesting. No one else can give you power. You empower yourself. Yes, there are people who can inspire you in some ways, but the more you externalize, the worse it is. And the more you give yourself this inflated sense of power. Look, there's only so much power that we have. We can control, I would say, directly control probably about 25%, not more than that. The other 25% you could probably influence. And then the rest just happens because the world around you keeps spinning and a lot of other people are doing things that affect you directly. So what you can control is somewhat limited, but you better kill it on that 25%. And this idea that some entity is going to give you empowerment, some rich guy who started some fund that's going to throw you a bone, some group where you hug it out, they're going to give you empowerment, or some corporate slogan is going to give you empowerment, or some meeting. No, that empowerment has to come from within. That comes from mental strength. That comes from grit. That comes from internal intrinsic motivation. That comes from knowing what you're trying to accomplish. Work on those things and work on following through. That is where empowerment is going to come from. The people with actual power, the more they can placate, the less they have to actually change. Wasn't that awesome? Now pay me. Now, listen, subscribe, tell a friend, and if you're able to, join the Patreon so I can produce more of these shows and bring it to you every week without fail with awesome bonus material for subscribers. I'm Steve Faktor. See you next time on the McFuture. You know, you look at Trump, for example, he's a guy who had very obviously a neglectful dad, and he has spent his entire adult life trying to prove himself to a dad who's no longer alive, unfortunately, or fortunately, who even knows what could have been if he was alive. A lot of people are letting the children run roughshod over universities and ban people and try to change what language is and what words mean and what we're allowed and not allowed to say and cancel people. Enough. Adults have to be adults now. It's time to wake up, okay? They don't know much.